All right, shalom to the elect of Israel. I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that were well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect of Israel. And this is another Milk Series lesson. We're going into 70 AD and a scattering of the southern kingdom, all right, of Israel, which are these so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians, right, the true Jews, into Africa and ultimately taken into America as well as other parts of the world. All right, this was biblical prophecy, and this is also another piece that shows us that you so-called Negroes, West Indians, Haitians are indeed the true Hebrew Israelites. And like I said, this is another Milk Series lesson. And if you would like to see other lessons I have done and Lord willing will do, you can just go to my page, click playlist, and it should say Milk Topics. And Salakia, if I'm talking low, it's just because I'm in a semi-public environment right now. All right. So Salakia, if I pause, or if you might hear some background noises, or just giving a heads up. But nevertheless, let's get right into it. So, Hebrew Israelites were the peoples taken during the transatlantic slave trade. Everybody knows about that story, right? Everybody should know, the transatlantic slave trade, how so-called blacks were captured and taken to America via cargo slave ships, right? However, the Bible specifically describes this event and the people that were involved in it being the true Hebrew Israelites, right? Think about that. The Bible describes that event, okay? But as it's commonly taught that our history begins with slavery, but that is not true, because in school they don't tell you that so-called blacks, fled into Africa, fleeing Roman persecution during 70 AD, because then that would obviously tell us who we are, okay? That we're the real Israelites, When you learn in school about black history, they most often start off in slavery. But that's not where our history begins. It goes back deeper than that. The Bible records our history far before the slave trade, going back to Jerusalem. And once again, Salaki, I know I'm talking low, so if you can, just plug in headphones or turn up the volume, all right? But it says, which also shows so-called blacks, the so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians are Hebrew Israelites. So let's take a look, right? And this, as you saw in the beginning of this video, was put together, right? A collage of pictures put together here. And this is comes from a book called Babylon to Timbuktu by a person named Rudolph R. Windsor, okay? And on page 84 of this book, it says, during the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Black Jewish slaves, showing you who the real people are, okay? Not these people that pretend to be us today, all right? And in Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24, our Lord and Savior Yahweh Shai had already warned of 70 AD, okay? And this is 70 AD, all right, is that history that is part of that history that led up to us running into Africa, okay? And, into the interiors of Africa, into the west coast of Africa, right? 70 AD is the true background for as to how we officially got over there. You know, to the point where they found a lot of our people when they came, you know, when this white man came to take them as slaves on cargo slave ships. All right. This describes the historical event of 70 AD, which is when the Roman army besieged Jerusalem, the ancient Roman army from the ancient Roman Empire, right? It says, in which our people were massively slaughtered and some fled Jerusalem. All right. And happened it was led by this man, all right, an Edomite, you know, so-called white man, all right. His name was General Titus. Okay, he's the one that led the besieging on Jerusalem, okay, during 70 AD. You know, this devil, the so-called white man, has been messing with us, with our people ever since back then, man, okay, even to this day, but it's going to come to an end very soon. But 70 AD, this was led by this man right here, General Titus, okay, a general of the ancient Roman Empire. And just to show you that this event, you know, really did happen. Well, first off, you know, we don't have to show any pictures because the scriptures say it, all right? But this is another piece that cements it even further, right? Because this is what's known as the Ark of Titus, and this stands up in Rome, Italy to this very day, okay? You know, this structure you're looking at here is called the Ark of Titus, right? You see it's being constructed on and worked around. You know, these are pictures, and it's right by the Colosseum. This is a real thing, okay? You know, and it has images on it, you know, on the inside of it, and this specifically shows basically from how when the Romans in 70 AD did besiege Jerusalem, you see they're carrying away the menorah, you know, the holy things of the temple, right? They're carrying it all away. Okay. You know, so this definitely happened. This 70 AD is once again, you know, the history that led up to us fleeing into the interiors of Africa. We were fleeing from Roman persecution because the Romans back in 70 AD besieged Jerusalem. Okay, and that's where we had lived at. You know, part of that's one of the places we Israelites had lived at. You know, and by that time it was only 3 tribes mainly in the land of Israel, which were the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the Jews. You know, but once 170 AD came around, the ancient Roman Empire's army, you know, came and besieged Jerusalem, okay, and they went and took away things out of the temple, and that's why it's inscribed, you know, that's why it's carved out here like this, okay. You know, this is another one right here, all right. This happened, you know, thousands of years ago, okay, and this is a inscription on the top of it, Senatus Populus. This is in Latin, okay? The ancient Romans spoke Latin, all right? But you can look up what this means, you know, but basically it's like senator, slack if I'm wrong, but I'm just trying to remember, because I had looked it up earlier. I'm just trying to remember exactly what it was saying. You know, it says populous, people of Romanus, you know, people of Rome, devotito, and then it says which means deified Titus. All right, it says Divi Vespasianif, which means, you know, deified Vespasian. All right, and it says something about Vespasian again on the bottom, and Titus, all right, which was the general at the time. He was the son of Emperor Vespasian of the Roman Empire, of the ancient Roman Empire. Okay, that was his son. Titus was Emperor Vespasian's son. Okay, and after 70 AD, they built this ark to commemorate his victory over us. You know, overtaking us down, over besieging our city, Jerusalem, in 70 AD. All right. This from Google. It says the Ark of Titus represents the Roman military victory over Jerusalem in the Jewish War, which was from 66 to 74 CE or AD, in other words, and the deification of Emperor Titus, commissioned by his brother Domitian shortly after Titus's death. The Ark serves as both a monument to the Flavian dynasty's military prowess and a celebration of Titus's apotheosis or ascent to godhood. All right, but this Ark, once again, commemorated and represented the victory that these devils had gotten over us back in that time, after they besieged us. All right, moving on. And this whole besieging of Jerusalem was also part of the curses as well. This is the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, starting at verse 49. The Lord Yahweh shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. And down here, okay, is the ancient Roman Empire's national animal symbol, which is an eagle. This specific one is called, they call it the Aquila. Okay, you can just look it up online, but it says a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, because the ancient Romans, they spoke Latin and we spoke Hebrew. Verse 50, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. Okay, because when they did slaughter our people in 70 AD, all right, they killed elderly all the way down to babies and newborns. Verse 51, and by the way, if you don't know, Josephus wrote about it, some detail as well. Deuteronomy 20-51, and he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kine, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates, until thy high and fenced walls come down, wherein thou trustest throughout all thy land. And he shall besiege thee in all thy gates throughout all thy land, which Yahweh thy power hath given thee. And these verses also go for other times. All right, our people got besieged. Okay, ancient Babylonian Empire. The ancient Syrian, I believe. Okay, slack if I'm wrong. All right, but it also goes for the those other empires that come against us, some other empires that came against us, but also for this time, it's that we're talking about here, which is 70 AD, when the ancient Roman Empire had come against us, okay? And they did pull down our towers, okay? Our high and fenced walls and everything, they besieged us, all right? Verse 54, verse 53. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, which is what? The flesh of thy sons and of thy daughters, which Yahweh thy power hath given thee in the siege and in the straitness, wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee. Because what they did was, part of what they did rather, was the ancient Roman Empire. They cut off the food from coming in and out of Jerusalem. Okay, so therefore that led to what? Famine, a severe famine, which Josephus wrote about, and it got so bad to the point to where our people were eating their own children. And there's an account of a woman that cut her son in half and ate half of him and saved the other half for later, man. So this was a horrifying time. All right. But the Messiah Yahushua prophesied about this in those verses. All right, that we're about to read. This is the book of Luke, chapter 21. I'm gonna go from verses 20 through 24. And when ye shall, and this is his words, and he prophesied about it because he was on the scene before it had happened, right? Before 70 AD happened. It says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So Yahushua was saying, when you see the Roman Empire coming, know that the desolation of Jerusalem is nigh. He was referring to the time of 70 AD. When you see when you see the ancient when you see the Roman Empire, the Roman army coming, know that the desolation of Jerusalem is near. Verse 22, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Okay, so what Yahweh Shai is saying here is basically, when you see the Romans coming, flee. Go into the mountains, which he was really referring to Africa. Okay? Saying flee into Africa, and this is how this is how our people, right, got, this is how our people, let me say, this is why they found us over in the west coast of Africa, okay, during the time of the slave trade, because we fled from Roman persecution, okay, into Africa, right? But where did we come from? We came from the land of Israel, from Jerusalem, you see, so we're the real Israelites. But this is the reason why they found a lot of our people over there in Western Africa, okay? Because what? We were fleeing Roman persecution in 70 AD, okay? Verse 20, so let me just read this. It says, Yahweh Shai warned about 70 AD, years before it happened. He basically said, when it does happen, flee into Africa. And this is how the to be so-called, because, we weren't yet called these terms just yet, but it says to be, it says, and this is how the to be so-called Negroes, West Indies, and Haitians were found in Africa, okay? Because they fled Roman persecution in 70 AD in Jerusalem. Verse 23, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. Right? He was saying that because what? Even children were gonna, get put to death and everything and all of that. And it says, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. Yahweh Shai was referring to the time of 70 AD. And Salaki, I think I called verse 23, but I don't think that was the right verse. Okay, but either way, it's all good. Bear with me 1 second here. All right. But he said there's going to be great distress in the land of wrath upon this people. Why? Because of the hell that the Roman army was going to bring. Right? And this is the same thing is said in Matthew 24. All right? I don't know if I skipped a verse, but I'm going to just keep reading. It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Okay? And this is recorded in Daniel, the 9th chapter, all right, which basically refers to the time of the ancient Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire's army besieging Jerusalem, okay? So he was saying when that happens, it says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him, once again, go to Africa, flee to Africa. It says, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Salaki. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes, and woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. Okay? Because what? Once again, the children and everything. So Yahweh Shai was saying, don't turn back for anything. Just go. Once you see them coming, go. Don't turn back to get anything. Just go. All right? But yeah, Salaki, I did skip a verse, but verse 24, roughly paraphrasing, says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword. You could just read along in Luke 21 and 24, pull it up while you're listening, if you can. It says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, because what the Romans did, the Roman army, when they came into Jerusalem during 70 AD, they slaughtered they slaughtered our people. All right. It says, and they shall be led away captive into all nations, because what 70 AD led up to, once again, was Israelites fleeing, all right, into different lands and everything, all right, but, also to Africa, right, because, and then what happened there? They were led away captive into what? Different places around the earth, but also mainly America, okay? You see, so 70 AD is the history behind that, So 70 AD is, once again, the history behind how or why they found our people, so-called blacks, you so-called Negroes, West Indies, and Haitians, all right, on the in Africa, okay, right? Because we fled Roman persecution in 70 AD, okay? And once again, Salakia, because I meant to put Luke 21 and 24 up here, all right? But just read along, okay? Now, going here, this is the book of Joel, chapter 3, starting at verse 4. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon? All right, and all the coast of... So, Tyre and Zidon, these are talking about Hamites, okay? Which they are the descendants of Ham, okay? Which the descendants of Ham are the literal Africans, okay? It says in all the coast of Palestine. Will ye render me a recompense? Right? So what the Lord is saying to them by the prophet Joel is like, telling like these Hamites, like, what business do you have with me? Are you trying to like pay me back? It says, and if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. So he's saying, if you trying to, pay me, like, he's basically saying, I'm gonna pay you back. Verse 5, because ye have taken my silver and my gold and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. Verse 6, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem, which is who? The southern kingdoms, the southern kingdom of Israel, which are who? You so-called blacks. So you so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians, right? It says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. The Grecians are who? Esau, the so-called white man. So it's telling Ham, the Africans, right, that they've sold the Israelites, they sold Hebrew Israelites unto the so-called white man. Okay, and when did this happen? This happened during the time of the transatlantic slave trade. It says that ye might remove them far from their border. And our border, meaning our land, all right, which is, the land of Israel, okay? But, we were more closer to while we were in Africa, but them selling us over to this devil, okay? And us being captured and taken there, taken to America, etc., right? We're extremely far from our land, or our border, you see? So this was already prophesied about before it even happened. So the whole transatlantic slave trade thing, that's just biblical prophecy. Verse 7. So it says the Hamites sold Hebrew Israelites to the so-called white man. Not just, because this Esau likes to say black people sold black people. No, the same people did not sell each other. It was a different nation of people that have similar characteristics like us, like dark skin, etc., right? That's the different nation of people that sold the people of the Lord to this devil, okay? They're just not just anybody, all right? And again, the Hamites sold Hebrew Israelites to the so-called white man, and these are the people, so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians, which are the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the Jews, the real ones, okay, the real Jews, man, all right? This is how you so-called, this is who you so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians are. Israelites of the southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, okay? And this was prophecy for the transatlantic slave trade to happen, which Israelites were sold by the Hamites, which are the so-called Africans, to the so-called white man for raw materials and goods, So this was all prophecy, man, that this stuff happened to us, okay? That we got sold as we did, taken into captivity, put on cargo slave ships. The Hebrew Israelites were put on these slave ships, man, okay? Not just regular black people, okay? And these Hamites that sold us, they're not the people of the Lord. They're heathens, okay? They're a heathen nation. The Lord is not dealing with them, all right? But it says, and the cargo slave ships were also prophesied to happen to us, which also proves we're the real Israelites. Okay? Because what? Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, which is a part of the curses, right? Because we read Deuteronomy 28, all right, from verses 15 through 68, to, it tells us how if we didn't obey the Lord and keep his commandments and his laws, that the curses in verses 16 through 68 would happen to us. And we disobeyed it, and they happened to us, and this is why we went through the things we went through. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. All right? With ships, though. Right? But let's look at something. It said, the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again. Right? This Egypt, what is this? It says, it's Revelation 11:8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city. Dead bodies meaning spiritually dead. Because at one point in time, we Israelites, we didn't know who we were. There was such a thing called the falling away, right? And which is where we discontinue from our heritage, Jeremiah 17:4, right? And it happened during slavery, where they beat, the Hebrew Israelite out of us, so to speak, where we were, it was through slavery we forgot who we were, as a people, our culture, our heritage, etc. So we were spiritually dead. It says, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So this place that it's referring to is spiritually called Sodom as well as Egypt. Why is it called Sodom? Well, in America, you have this. Okay? And bear with me 1 second, because somebody coming. On the contrary, I could. I don't know. Salaki for the interruption. All right, but it's spiritually called Sodom because you have stuff like this going on in America. In Egypt, well, what happened in ancient Egypt? Ask yourself what happened then. The Israelites were in slavery, right? In America, what happened then? Well, what happened here in America? The Israelites were in slavery, as you see here in these pictures. Egypt was a hardcore captivity for our people, and this was a hardcore captivity, This is a hardcore captivity, I should say, too. But this shows you that what? Egypt, this new modern day Egypt is what? America, okay? And even when you look on the back of the dollar bill, you got this eagle here. Once again, a nation, just that swift as the eagle flies, right, with the American colors on, and then right on the other side of it, you got a pyramid that goes back to ancient Egypt, and then on the top, what does it say? The United States of America. It should be plain, man. It should be very plain, okay? America is that Egypt is talking about in Deuteronomy 28 and 68. So when you read it, Deuteronomy 20 and 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. All right, in Egypt. So what is it saying? The Lord's going to bring us into slavery, which that Egypt's is talking about America again with ships. All right, and once again, look, you got the land of Israel right here, and land of Egypt right there. You don't need a ship to go from Israel to Egypt. That's walking distance. In that time, you could have put a camel on and came down there. You don't need ships. So it's talking about America, man, and coming to America in slavery, but by way of what? By way of ships. cargo slave ships, man. That's in the Bible. All right. That's biblical, man. Okay. You know, it's by no coincidence that happened. Okay. Deuteronomy 28:68 continuing on. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, meaning we would never see our homeland again. And there, in this new Egypt, America, ye shall be sold, ye shall be sold, ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, which means slave men and slave women. You should ask yourself, how will we be sold? And no man shall buy you. And buy here goes into meaning redeem, which means basically like rescue, deliver. Nobody would get us out of this condition that we're in as a people ultimately, you know, except for Yahweh Shai. Because you've had people like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, etc. Okay? But what does it mean that there you shall be sold unto your enemies? Simply put, auction blocks, man. You see? Sold unto your enemies. And who are we sold unto? The so-called white man. You see, showing you he's your enemy. All right? Moving on. All right? There's another one. And it said for slave men and slave women. That's exactly what we were when we came over here first. We were slaves, and we still slaves, man. To this very day, we're just not in chattel slavery anymore. All right? But you see how all this is prophesied, and this was a part of a curse put on the Israelites. And who did it happen to? So-called blacks, so-called Negroes, West Indies, and Haitians. They are the southern kingdom of the nation of Israel. We are Hebrew Israelites. Okay? In this history, in this big event we went through, all right, is in the Bible. All right? But also, let me get this. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 7. And this is the blessing of Judah. And he said, hear, Lord, Yahweh, the voice of Judah, Judah being you so-called Negroes, and bring him unto his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and be thou an help to him from his enemies. But the point I want to get is where it says, and bring him unto his people. Okay? Because what? You know, his people being the northern kingdom of Israel, which are the so-called Latinos and Native American Indians, right? And by the time of the slave trade, they were already on the western side of the world. You had Native Americans, so-called Native Americans up in North America and Canada, and so-called Latinos in Central and South America. Okay? So by the time of the slave trade, right, and by the way, once again, so-called Latinos and Native Americans are Hebrew Israelites of the northern kingdom of Israel. They were already on the western side of the earth. You know, 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter talks about how they got over there, right? No wonder when Columbus came to that part of the world, he found people already over there, which are the Israelites. All right, but that's another lesson that brothers have done. I myself have done lessons on that if you want to, get edified. All right. But when the slave trade came and put on cargo slave ships and carried up you so-called Negroes onto cargo slave ships, what happened? You were brought unto the rest of your people. Or you were brought onto the Western Hemisphere where the rest of your people are at. You see? So let me continue. So back in Joel chapter 3 and verse 7. So it recalled how, these Hamites, they sold us, right, to the so-called white man, right? But Joel chapter 3 verse 7, behold, I will raise them. The Lord is going to raise us, Israelites, out of the place where ye have sold them, and raise them, going into us waking up to the fact that we're the Israelites, as well as to when Yahweh Shai returns. All right, he's, literally going to raise us, of course, he's going to raise up the elect of Israel, of course, from all over the world, but, mainly from North America, okay? It says, and will return your recompense upon your own head. We're going to pay them back for what they've done to us, You see, for selling us, to these these Hamites selling us. The Lord's going to repay these Hamites, these Africans, for selling us. All right. So it's not over. See, the Lord doesn't forget. Man forgets, but the Lord doesn't forget. Okay. And in the next verse, he expounds on how he's going to do that. Verse 8, and I will sell your sons and your daughters, right? The Hamites' sons and daughters, into the hand of the children of Judah. So when Yahushua returns, right, the Lord is going to put us in a position of power to where we're going to have these Hamites, these Africans, subject to us. We're going to be able to take them over and have them subject to us, and we'll be able to sell. And it says, and they shall sell them into Slakia, and they shall sell, and they, the Israelites, shall sell them, the Hamites, to the Sabians, to a people far off, for the Lord has spoken it. So once again, when Yahushua returns, he's going to give, us power to be able to take over these Hamites, put them in subjection, right? And we're going to have the power to be able to sell them to, as it says, the Sabians. You see, so it's not over with that, okay? But, this lesson was quick, But, could have gone more in depth, but, it is what it is. I just wanted to, get to the point, really, on it. You see, so as a recap, the so-called Negroes, West Indians, and Haitians are Hebrew Israelites. And we fled into Africa and other parts of the world, fleeing Roman persecution in 70 AD. And the people who were captured, sold, stolen, and shipped were and are indeed Hebrew Israelites. Okay? So, that's the history, and that's the real understanding of, why, this transatlantic slave trade happened, and how we got to there, how a lot of people got to the western part of, the interiors of Africa, because we were fleeing Roman persecution in 70 AD, okay? We fled into Africa, and the Hamites sold us to the so-called white men. This is all a part of biblical prophecy, all right? But this also goes to show who we are, though, the real Hebrew Israelites, man, and it's time to wake up, all right? So, Roland, this lesson was edifying. Once again, it's on the Milk series lesson, giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, every well. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect of Israel. Shalom to the elect.